exciting at the beginning. You know you can do it. You start running fast. Wind's in your hair. It's euphoric. You're in complete control. Run faster than you've ever run before. At some point, you realize gravity and the slope are taking over, and you're starting to lose control, and you start to get ready for the fall. And it comes. And it's head over the hills, and scraped and bruised, and you end up at the bottom of the hill and assess the damages. This is my analogy to records in our time. At the beginning, we strolled along the top of this grassy knoll with our paper records and all of our laws that told us how to manage those records, how to keep track of them, who could have them, who could not, our retentions. It was very manageable. Well, then our records became electronic, and we started running down the hill, and it was fast, and it was euphoric because our job just got easier, and we thought for sure we can apply our regular laws to these digital records, and we were in complete control. Well, right now we're at the next phase. Right now we're at the point where we are running as fast as we can, and we're just realizing we're not in control. And as records people, we're basically bracing ourselves for the head over heels fall and the scrapes and bruises, and we're hoping that when we hit the bottom of the hill that our damages will be minimal. Where we're feeling right now. What are some of the risks and challenges that have occurred with all of our digital information? Data mining, data brokers, difficulty in protecting personally identifiable information. Your personally identifiable information is home address, home phone, cell phone if it's a personal number, your social security numbers, your birth dates, your signature. There's a number of things, anything that makes you personally identifiable. Time-consuming creation of records, data breaches, email, social media, text messages, improper disposition of records, and legal holds. All the ones in blue could be a whole hour presentation. I'm only going to address basically the first three items. Who's familiar with GRAMA? Who's not? Are there some that are not familiar with GRAMA law? Those of you who are familiar, you feel like you're pretty comfortable with it? Okay. Basically, in a nutshell, let's just read this portion of the law. The Government Records Access and Management Act, commonly known as GRAMA, is a comprehensive records law governing the management of government records, who is entitled to access those records, the exercise and enforcement of access rights, and the establishment of the state archives. GRAMA states that it is the responsibility of Utah's governmental entities and political subdivisions to establish and maintain an active, continuing program for the economical and efficient management of the governmental entities' records. In enacting this act, the legislature encourages two constitutional rights: the public's right of access to information concerning the conduct of the public's business, and the right of privacy in relation to personal data gathered by governmental entities. We refer to this as the right to know versus right to privacy. And this used to be quite straightforward. We just considered it. That makes perfect sense. However, since information has become digital, the right side has been pretty much forgotten. In order for our discussion, I need to just go through a few definitions so that you understand. They're all part of this discussion. Regular GRAMA definitions. The first one is a record series. We call a record series a group of related records filed, used together as a unit, and evaluated as a unit for retention purposes. For example, a personnel file could have their application, it could have their evaluations, it could have their insurance information. A number of different records could all be included in this, but it would simply be, the record series would be a personnel file. And so it falls under one heading, even though there's a number of records included within that series. In our paper days, this was a manila folder. I could go pull it out of the file, and I'd have a manila folder that had all of your personnel records in there. Well, now those, often with all of our records, many of our record series, it simply information is in our database. And this creates huge problems for those of us who are receiving requests because they simply say, it's in there, they know what's in there, the information is in our database. So when they request it, we simply need to produce it. However, we still have to manage those records. We still have to follow the guidelines of GRAMA, where we still have to identify all those pieces of information that's in there, the database. We have to identify, well, these pieces of information are part of the personnel file. So how did we classify it? How did we schedule it? So we can't just blatantly give information out because it's there. It still has to be identified as a record series. Next is the retention schedule. A timetable that identifies the length of time records must be retained in active and inactive status before final destruction. Retention schedules are not arbitrary. GRAMA specifies the proper disposition of governmental records. In order to schedule a record, they all have to be approved by the state archives, so you can't just arbitrarily determine the retention periods. There's several good reasons to have a retention schedule.
Put this on real quick. Back or stuff.
Sure. I thought I had a pretty loud voice. Okay. Okay, can you hear better? Yeah. Okay. Okay, there's several good reasons to have a retention schedule. One is save storage space. We used to say that when they were paper records, but even when they're digital, there still are costs associated with saving too much information. So your retention schedule determines at what point you can destroy a record. Like I said, it's not arbitrary, and that way you're keeping records only as long as you have to, and it's the law. We cannot destroy records unless they've met their retention. Davis County recently moved to a new building, so everyone's emptying out their files, and fortunately we already had retention schedules in place, and so you already knew whether or not a record could be destroyed. And there actually are, there could be serious consequences if something is destroyed inappropriately. Can any of you think of reasons why you don't want to keep them longer than possible?
Because they're searchable.
Correct. Even if a record had a 5-year retention and it's been 8, but you still have it in your possession, if it's requested, at that point you have to produce it. If you destroy it at that point, even though it's met its retention schedule, it's spoliation, and you can be sanctioned by the courts. So it's important to have a retention schedule and to destroy them when they have met their retention. Because if they're in your possession, they are searchable, and they can't come back to bite you. Did I say hands?
Because we're running out of room. It's all this stuff's on paper.
Yeah. And we do have paper hoarders and digital hoarders. And okay. I don't know if any of you remember hearing about Enron. Enron, one of their problems is they went to court, records were requested, and their president immediately told everyone to begin shredding. And the fact that they shredded after the discovery is why they were sanctioned. Okay, classifications. That means determining whether a record series, record, or information within a record is public, private, controlled, protected, or exempt from disclosure. The classification of a record allows the individual to know whether or not to give a record out. For those of us who have the responsibility of dealing with the GRAMA request, this saves us from having to make subjective decisions. It's already been determined. We've already scheduled the records. It's already spelled out that it's public or it's private or it's protected or a portion of it is. Do any of you know do you all have a records person in your organization, and do you know who they are? I see hands. Okay, are there any who don't? Because right now our GRAMA requests are it's become really a constant battle of protecting ourselves against lawsuits. Electronically stored information, I just will refer to as ESI.
Davis County's definition for county ESI is a record created, generated, sent, communicated, received, or stored by electronic means on a county server. This is one I think many employees and even some of our top people don't understand, that anything that comes in or out their emails on their computer, on their phones, can be searchable. We receive GRAMA requests on a regular basis. I want all of the emails between so-and-so and such and such. And our IT department retrieves all of those emails. Then we have the difficulty that we have to determine whether or not all of the information within those emails are public or not. And Davis County recently created an ESI policy, and we're at the point we still need to get out and make sure that we've trained every one of the employees. Because at this point, records specialists like myself, we ultimately were responsible for all of the records. But now every one of your employees who has access to a PC has access to records, and therefore they're liable for some of the ways in which they use that information and to inappropriately destroy them, for data breaches, for there's a whole number of laws that they need to be educated. And there are some basic rules in emails that you need to follow that would help save a lot of headache in litigation. Some of those are have a clear subject line. That makes it easier for IT to find certain requests when we receive them. Be sure you only discuss one subject in an email. Don't discuss various subjects, because that's part of what creates the time in having to weed through these emails to see if there's other information, private or protected, or another subject that was included in that email. Also, be very careful in what you say in an email. There have been a lot of cases where, of the harassment that a lot of the high school kids are involved in, and some of the things they're saying in emails back and forth. It's especially a serious, in our workplace, for people to say inappropriate things in their emails. There was a training that we had from the Attorney General's office, and I've been guilty of this for a long time. It's unfortunate because emails are so wonderful to make our jobs easier, but so often I can get a request where they want all the emails where I discussed their GRAMA request. So my emails are an email to the attorney, just got a request, give me a call. And that's a transitory record. There's nothing in it except telling him to give me a call. And I discuss all of my GRAMA things on the phone or down the hall. I get a lot of exercise going up and down the halls. And then I write notes in my own work papers. I know that sounds so paranoid. But if you are using your emails as a tool, keep in mind at any time someone could request it. And if it's requested, it could be posted on the front page of the paper. And so for myself, it's not even that I'm trying to hide anything, because my discussions are, well, what do you think? I've studied the law. I think we should take these things, do these things, and we're discussing things back and forth, but they can be misconstrued, and I just don't have a whole big mountain of emails that can be retrieved. I just saved a bunch of work. That's my main motivation. It just makes my job easier. I don't have any emails where I discussed. I send out a draft and the attorney approved it, and that's it. That's all I have. So, but you need to be sure your employees are educated, because that's such a big target on your emails, and that could be a whole hour just on that. This is one of my biggest battles now. Records are defined in terms of their function, not format. The most important aspect in identifying a record is the content. Whether your records are paper or microfilm, and yes, Virginia, we still have microfilm. If it's paper or microfilm or in your computer or on your phones, it doesn't matter what format it is. When we give it a title in the record series, when we've determined, say our personnel files, we've determined that it is now, we follow the classifications and the retention regardless of the format. And I've had a lot of requests where we're basically being asked to create records, which I'll discuss more. And this is one of our problems, is they think because it's in our database, we're not creating a record. We simply have to produce it. Okay, what is data mining? This is one of the world's best kept secrets. It's something most people are not aware of. Generally, data mining, sometimes called data or knowledge discovery, is the process of analyzing data from different perspectives and summarizing into useful information. Information that can be used to increase revenue, cut costs, or both. Data are any facts, numbers, or text that can be processed by a computer. The patterns, associations, or relationships among all the data can provide information. Information can be converted into knowledge about historical patterns and future trends. Basically, they create data warehouses. Those were created by data brokers. And in a nutshell, data is information and knowledge, and it equals revenue and power. So right now in our day and age, information equals dollars. It equals money. Our jobs used to be called records management, and it's now referred to as information governance. And so where do the data brokers find all of the information being compiled and sold? So I don't know how clear this is, but basically we have our little consumer up on top. And you guys all know that when you post information that we go on the computer, you know that they're tracking you. And that's something most people are aware of. So when you do go into your internet and you shop, you buy something on a website, you're fully aware that some of your information is being collected. And I think most people are aware of that now. So this information is from when it's posted on publicly online. If you shop online, if you register on websites, if you shop at stores online, if you fill out warranty cards, and the very last category says you buy a house. And actually it's anything you do with a governmental entity is off to that side. Well then, the next phase, you have data brokers, online stores, websites, stores, companies, and local governments that are collecting all of this information. And then it comes to your data broker, who's using all of these resources and who's creating a little folder on an individual. And he's collecting his name, his address, his phone number, his email, anything they can get that profiles each individual. And what I've seen occur, I've been at the county now for over 22 years, and so I've watched the whole process, is at this point, governmental entities are now viewed as informational repositories. We are a gold mine of information as far as these data brokers are concerned. I know when I ever talk about this with anyone, just, friends, neighbors, they're actually surprised, because let me give you a list. Think about some of the records that you've given to governmental entities. Have you purchased a home? Do you pay taxes on a home or business? Have you submitted a building permit for remodel? Have you called in a 911 call? Are you a registered voter? Have you signed a petition? Do you have a passport? Have you licensed a dog? Have you adopted an animal from an animal shelter? Have you brought in a stray to a shelter? Have you called on a neighbor's barking dog or an animal neglect or abuse? Do you have a driver's license? Is your vehicle licensed? Do you have a swimming pool? Are you married? Have you filled out a marriage application or license? Have you refinanced your home? Are you late on your taxes? Could you be entitled to some unclaimed funds? Have you received a traffic ticket? Have you used facilities provided by the health department, and are you divorced? These are just some examples of records that government collects on you. And I think probably everybody here in the room has done most of the things on this list. Everything I've mentioned here I've received requests for, either one at a time or in bulk. And some of these items are private, like your driver's license. There are certain things that are private, but not very many from that list that I just read. Is everyone familiar with the terms transparency and open records? You guys hear them all the time now, okay? So I'm going to go back and read a little part of the GRAMA law. The public's right of access to information concerning the conduct of the public's business. That's accountability of the government to the people. That is a good law to be in place. When we're talking about transparency and open records, it's accountability of the government to the people. And the people who are paying their taxes for government to take care of their business. And so financial information, budgets, salaries, contracts, minutes, policies, all of these things have always been public and always been available to the public. And in my opinion, this is what accountability is. But since we've gone digital and this climate of big data, almost all records and information are considered to fall under that big umbrella of open records and transparency. They basically assume if that information is in our possession, it's public, it's part of open records, and they have a right to it. Whenever any legislation goes out in an attempt to rein some of this in, the media, the lobbyists are quick to start crying open records, transparency, and they don't let the public know that part of the records that are going out there are the public's records and the public's information. It's not just the numbers of the finance and the budgets and contracts and accountability. Okay, can any of you guys see any possible risks? You guys are all risk managers. Can any of you think of any possible risks when we send information out en masse? County-wide lists. Can any of you think of anything? Okay, let's talk about it. One of them is retentions, okay? As a records manager, the county creates records. We create a schedule. We determine who may have access to them and how long we keep those records. And it's important that we maintain those retention schedules. When your information is collected and posted online or sold in any other format, what's their retention schedule? There is none. Right now, the European Union just passed a law that has given Google and Facebook a huge black eye, and it's called the right to be forgotten. Because there are people around the world, actually outside of America, Europe is very, very concerned about their privacy. They have privacy ministers. They have a lot of privacy laws. They are far more concerned about their privacy than we are in America. And a lot of these people are concerned because they pull up something that, a news story they were in 25 years ago, or something that happened to them, or they were arrested, or some negative story, and it is now, someone can pull it up, and it will follow them the rest of their life. There is no retention. So that after this law that the EU passed, individuals can go to Google or Facebook and fill out forms and have that information removed. But that's only European citizens, not America. The other one is classifications. Put that up there, okay. The classification of records. The public is they're assuming that all of our records are public. And here's the problem. I've received a request for one record, and I can go through it and ensure that something didn't get passed that shouldn't have. You know, somebody had written down a social on a page, or something is in those records, and I can ensure that it's okay to release that record. When you release records in mass, you have no guarantee. We don't know what goes out there. And let me give you an example. One request I received this year was a list of all marriage licenses issued between Friday, December 20th, 2013, and Monday, January 6th, 2014. I don't know if that stands out to anyone, but that was the period of time that same-sex individuals were able to fill out marriage licenses and be married. So I received several requests for this list. And some counties just, oh, okay, that's a public record, and sent it out. I had concerns as an invasion of privacy. Is this a situation where someone could have been profiled? What if these lists would have been posted on a newspaper? What if someone, could it have affected their jobs? Could it have affected them in any way? To me, that's clearly an invasion of privacy. And it would just take one person who could have a negative consequence as a result of this list going out. The difficulty is there are no laws. That every time we are faced with this kind of situation, we have to say, is it defendable? Can we defend denying this? And there are no laws in place at the current time because marriage license lists are the names of both parties and the date that they were married and their marriage license number. So was there something personal and private in that? So it's not scheduled private. And so we had to release it. But these are just some of my concerns that, especially now when all of this data is put in, could someone receive a list like this and then attach it to a profile they're creating on a person? And there can be negative ramifications, and we don't always know what people's situations are. Our voter registrations are public. How many people are aware of what our voter registration thing that just hit recently, where it was posted online? We've been fighting for years to have the birth dates taken off of that voter registration list because those of us who are in the middle of it know that it's a public record. And it's never been able to make it through legislation. But then when the news story came out and the public became aware that this list went out, and in this time of identity theft, who feels good about having your name, your address, and your birth date out there? And there was a big outcry, so then they quickly changed it. Now your birth dates won't go out, but is it online? And what's the retention? So if you were a registered voter in the state of Utah, your name is out there with your address and your phone number, and it will be out there indefinitely. So even if they changed it now, it's not going to do any good. I received a lot of phone calls and emails when that happened because we look at the whole big picture and they're saying, well, the voter registration lists are public. Well, they're individuals. There are women that have ex-husbands, ex-boyfriends, and they're in danger. And they've told me he's deadbeat enough that he's not going to come after me, but if it's that easy, he'll find me. So there are a lot of individuals, you don't know their circumstances, that they do the best they can. And I know sometimes when I talk about this, people say, well, all of our stuff's out there anyway. Where do you think it came from? A lot of the information that's out there on all of us, that's one of the places it came from. At home, I went on Google to read some of the records laws. It has to do with my job, so sometimes I read boring articles on open records. And then because I've done that, they flash advertisements that have to do with the subjects I've been interested in. So I received this advertisement from Public Records Search Service. It's called Instant Checkmate. And they're telling you that, they can get every bit of information on an individual. They're telling you we can give you their birth dates, we can give you all of this information on anyone. And how wonderful it is. They have protected themselves. Over at the very beginning it says, disclaimer, you may not use our service or the information it provides to make decisions about consumer credit, employment, insurance, tenant screening, or any other purpose that could require FCRA compliance. So they're going to enforce that, right? So obviously they know that the information they're supplying legally cannot be used for those purposes. But they protected themselves by putting a disclaimer right now. Anyone who's doing goes on to their Instant Checkmate to find out every single thing they can about you. They're going to trust their integrity that they wouldn't abuse that. So that's the kinds of things that we're dealing with. And if someone happens to be a target of someone with an agenda, and they're able to pull up their identity, they pull up their name, and then they get all of this other personal information. I can see lots of ways it can be abused. And once a record goes out, it's it's public. People can do whatever they want with it. We have no control once we release a record, like this silly disclaimer. They post this information and they have no control over how it's used. And some counties even post a lot of this information online anyway. The other thing is the cost. We are now, I bet over half of my requests I'm getting are from companies, are from businesses that just want these lists for financial purposes. And your taxpayers, all of us as taxpayers ourselves, are paying for county employees to do their jobs, and a lot of our job is producing information for other entities to sell. And another one of the concerns is the creation of a record. Part of GRAMA states, a governmental entity in response to a records request is not required to create a record, compile, format, manipulate, package, summarize, or tailor information, or provide a record in a particular format, medium, or program not currently maintained by the governmental entity. At this point, it is becoming increasingly impossible for us to defend this part of the law, because they simply say, well, the information's in there, pull it up, just provide it. We don't have county Google. We don't have the money where we just punch in three words and pull up a little Boolean search and they retrieve everything that they wanted. Let me give you an example of one request I received. A list of appraisals for multi-family commercial properties built between 1981 to 2003 with between 80 and 300 apartment units on 1.5 acres or more land. How would you find that? And do you think it's for commercial reasons? Well, there's another problem. Commercial information, there's a state statute, 59-1-404, that commercial information has to be treated entirely different than the other appraisal information. It can affect a business when they've included a lot of their financial information in their commercial properties. And there is actually laws that they have to be treated differently. So here's another concern is, are your records people, a lot of our records people have been assigned that position as other duties. They're an office specialist, and then the law came out that everyone had to have a records officer. Oh, okay, you do this too. And a lot of them haven't had sufficient training to even know. And that's one of our problems too, is as record specialists, is we get remember my mother-in-law told me, your worst enemy will be your children's friends' parents that let them do things that you don't let your own kids do. Well, their parents let them go. Well, that's one of our biggest problems as records people, is other counties that release things that we don't. And they say, well, they gave it to us, why aren't you?
So if our records officer is an elected position that he's not rerunning, does it matter who in the county is the records officer?
It's important. There's one that's assigned to each governmental entity, so if you have someone that's on their way out, they need to assign someone else to take their place. And there is a law in place now. I think it started about 2 years ago. If you go on the Utah State Archives website, they do have to be certified.
So there's training.
Mm-hmm. And there is, you can go, if you go on the Utah State Archives.gov website, and it has a whole, it says records officer, it has the whole training, the test, it has information, there's a lot there right on that website.
But it doesn't matter who in the county is that records officer.
It just needs to be someone assigned. Mm-hmm. And it can be, perhaps an elected official. Ultimately, the records people are under the clerk across the state, but it's whoever that entity assigns. One of the difficulties too, if we're going to talk about requests too, is sometimes the person seems bothersome and troublesome, so you decide, okay, let's just give it to him. But like Peter Sturba just talked about, if there's a big issue of precedence, if you give in to one person, then you can, suddenly that becomes your whole job. is just constantly doing something you didn't do under your regular course of business. Here's a few little privacy facts. Records people receive a magazine called Information Management. The definition that is most relevant to RIM, that's records people, is that privacy is the right for a living and identifiable individual to have some control over the collection, storage, and disclosure of his or her personal information held by governmental agencies, financial institutions, and other public and private entities. These new modes for creating, capturing, and storing data have had unimagined and serious implications for managing records privacy, as evidenced by the increasing occurrences of privacy-related lawsuits against high-profile governmental and private entities around the globe for failing to comply with privacy legislation. Whoops. And this, okay. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development guidelines state that personal information must be collected fairly and lawfully, used only for the purpose specified during collection, adequate, relevant, and not excessive to that purpose, accurate and up-to-date, accessible, kept secure, and subject to disposal after the purpose is completed. All of these last quotes I don't think we are adhering to in our present climate of open records and transparency. An example of one thing I'm concerned about, this year I've been inundated with requests for a list of everyone who is delinquent in their property taxes. Davis County has a process when it's 5 years delinquent, then it can go up for the May tax sale. But we put forth every effort. We send out individuals to meet with them and try to work things out. I think we've only had like 2 homes ever go up for a May tax sale, and they were freaky situations, like one that slid down a hill and one the family just wanted to let it go. But we put forth every effort. This year I have been inundated with a list of delinquent taxpayers. We have that list because it was created for mortgage companies, so they know whether or not you are paying your taxes. One elderly gentleman called our treasurer's office. Someone had put eviction notice on his front door stating that since his taxes were overdue, if he did not pay X amount or meet these provisions, his home would be confiscated. Can you see ways that this information can be abused? A lot of these people that are delinquent in their taxes, it could be the elderly, they can be some with disabilities, and we have no idea of how these individuals are contacting the people with delinquent taxes, but currently there's no laws in place that we can deny that request. This is my imaginary dossier of Mr. Brandon J. Ominous. We have his address, we have his home, work, cell numbers, we have his email address, we have his birth date for his voter registration, we have his wife's name and the day they were married. He's a registered Republican voter. He remodeled his home in 2002. We have all the details. He has a dog named Lassie. It's a golden retriever that's 6 years old. He brought a troublesome neighborhood cat into the shelter in 2013. He owns a vacation home with all the details. Weber County is holding some unclaimed funds for him. He signed the Count My Vote petition. We have his signature. He did a 911 call when his son had an altercation with a neighbor. He's received 3 traffic violations, and we have all of the information on his home. We know how many bedrooms, we know what year his house was built, and in some counties we even have a drawing, everything. One of the requests I received a few years ago was from an entity in California that wanted every one of our appraisals for the whole entire county. There's over 108,000. Every county across the state received the same request. I went to an assessor's meeting and there were a lot of frustrated counties dealing with this request. He offered to pay $50. And in researching this request, we denied it initially because we do not have a list of all of the appraisals. We don't need that to do our job. Our assessors, each time they need to assess a property, they simply go out and deal with a property one at a time. We do not need an entire list. However, he kept appealing, and then we saw that he had history across the country of suing counties who don't give him what he asked. And most of it had to do with money. He wanted to do it for almost nothing. And he wins every time. I mean, one county paid $40,000 for an expert witness and they still lost. And they pay exorbitant attorney's fees, and then they still have to turn over the records. The only two counties who didn't win in his lawsuits was one county that had in place a policy that said they charge X amount per parcel. And so he had to pay the several thousand. The other one was Virginia. Virginia actually has a law in their state, and it was recently upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court, that they do not have to respond to requests from out-of-state people. And the U.S. Supreme Court actually upheld that, and they're the only ones who have won him. The county had to determine, did we have a chance to win if we went to court? So we buckled for just over $200. We created the file, and guess what? When you create a record, and I have had major arguments from individuals recently that you're not creating a record if you're just pulling it out of the system. However, now that we've created this record, every year we have to update it. Every year we have to create a new one. And now other entities want the same list, and they all pay $200. How much do you guys, have you ever seen what you have to pay for an appraisal? And now they get this giant, complete appraisal information on every parcel in the whole state of Utah for almost nothing. And again, I see so many possible risks. It's just going to take one person who has a negative experience because of all of this information that went out. And there's Alan Barnett from the Utah State Archives. Basically, he said a quote, "We create records to do our jobs." That's not the case anymore. We're being asked to create records so other entities can use it to make money off of their information that they've collected. Solutions. I put a question mark under this because basically I'm not a specialist like Peter Sturga as far as years and years of his education and his experience in the courts. I'm basically just someone who had years and years in the trenches. And my main purpose is just to be sure that you're informed and you're aware of the kind of information that is going out and some of the possible risks. And these are the only things I can see as possible as solutions. Number one, inform the public. We were never able to get those birth dates off of the voter registration list until the public was aware of it. And there was an outcry from the public. Most individuals I've spoken to are pretty outraged when they realize that records collected by government are being given to other people. As I read in some of those guidelines, they should only be used for the reason they were collected. They shouldn't, just be sent out there. One of the articles I read, it said the high court justices, in referring to the Virginia case when they did not allow this individual to get their information because they already have a law in place. It says the high court justices were also not convinced that access to information is a fundamental right protected by the Constitution. And that's what we're fighting now.